November 28, 1944. The Pacific night is still. Moonlight glimmers on the dark waves south of Honshu. A steel giant slices through the black water. The Shinano. 70,000 tons of armor, engines, and ambition. The largest aircraft carrier ever built by human hands. Japan's final hope, sailing under the cloak of secrecy. On her decks, young sailors in ill-fitted uniforms breathe in the cold, salt air. Many have never been to sea before. They glance up at the colossal hull towering above them, unaware they are aboard a ship still unfinished, untested, unready. Below the waves, silence hides a predator. The American submarine USS Archerfish stalks in the dark, tracking faint echoes on sonar. Commander Joseph Enright studies the signal. A massive contact, moving fast, escorted but vulnerable. He doesn't yet know its name. But when he orders his crew to prepare torpedoes, history is already in motion, because within 17 hours, Japan's greatest warship, its floating fortress of pride, will vanish beneath the sea. The fall of Shinano didn't begin on the night she sank. It began 2 years earlier, in the smoking aftermath of the Battle of Midway. In June 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy suffered a catastrophe that shattered its backbone. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were lost in a single day to U.S. dive bombers. Japan's offensive power in the Pacific evaporated, and with it, the aura of invincibility that had carried the rising sun across Asia. The empire's naval leadership was stunned. The men who had once believed in the superiority of the Japanese warrior spirit now faced a truth they could not escape. Technology, production, and strategy, not courage, would decide the war. In the months that followed, Japan's naval engineers and strategists met behind closed steel doors in Tokyo's Naval General Staff building. They spoke of rebuilding their strength. If the Americans had mass production, Japan would have something else: scale. A single ship that embodied absolute power. At Kure Naval Arsenal, an unfinished behemoth lay in dry dock beside her completed sister, the Yamato. Originally designed as a third Yamato-class battleship, this new hull, designated number 110, was intended to surpass every enemy ship afloat. But as the Pacific skies filled with American aircraft and Japan's air cover crumbled, priorities changed. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's successors understood that battleships no longer ruled the seas. Carriers did. Thus, in early 1943, the plans for number 110 were quietly rewritten. The half-built battleship would be reborn as something new, the world's largest aircraft carrier. The decision was born of both desperation and pride. Japan needed a symbol, proof that the empire still possessed the will and industrial might to fight. But it was also an admission of defeat, a realization that the age of gunnery and armor had passed. Work began in secret. The Japanese public never knew of her existence. Even many within the Navy were unaware. To the government, she was a special project, one whose very name was classified. The shipyard workers were sworn to silence, the area guarded like a fortress. The conversion process was ambitious and dangerous. Engineers had to transform a battleship hull, built for heavy guns and thick armor, into an aircraft carrier with elevators, hangars, and flight decks. Every modification added complexity. Every change added delay. Japan's once mighty industrial system, already straining under American bombing, could barely keep up. By mid-1944, as the Allies advanced through the Marianas and B-29s began striking the home islands, the Shinano was still incomplete. But Tokyo's leaders demanded results. They needed the illusion of strength, and so corners were cut, armor plates left unbolted, bulkheads incomplete. firefighting systems only half installed. When her massive hull finally slipped from dry dock in October 1944, the ship was a paradox, a masterpiece of engineering, and a disaster waiting to happen. At 265 meters long and over 70,000 tons, she dwarfed every other carrier on Earth. She could carry up to 50 aircraft, though few were ever loaded. Her armor was thicker than any carrier ever built. A floating fortress designed to survive bomb hits that had destroyed the Akagi and Kaga 2 years before. Yet the irony was cruel. She was too large, too secret, too unfinished to ever fulfill her purpose. And as American submarines prowled Japan's coastal waters with growing confidence, her first and final voyage was already sealed by fate. The Shinano was born in secrecy and would die in silence. Her name, taken from an ancient province of Japan, meant enduring river. But the river of destiny was running dry. By the autumn of 1944, the Empire of Japan stood on the edge of collapse. The once mighty combined fleet, which had thundered across the Pacific, was now a shadow of its former self. The Battle of the Philippine Sea that June had ended in disaster. Over 400 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan's naval air arm, once feared and disciplined, was decimated. The Empire still had ships, but no trained pilots to fly from them. At sea, the U.S. Navy's Task Force 38 roamed the Pacific like a steel storm. Its carriers, fueled by American industry, launched raids deep into Japan's defensive perimeter. Beneath the waves, an invisible war was being won by American submarines. By late 1944, Japan's shipping lanes were strangled. Tankers carrying vital oil from the Dutch East Indies were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. Every week, thousands of tons of supplies and hundreds of sailors vanished into the ocean. In this desperate atmosphere, Shinano became more than a ship. She was a symbol, a promise whispered among officers that Japan could still strike back. But the truth was darker. The Empire no longer had the resources or time to build her properly. Bombs rained on Kure and Yokosuka shipyards almost daily. Air raid sirens howled as workers hammered through the night under blackout conditions. Steel was scarce, fuel rationed, morale collapsing. The Naval Command faced a cruel choice: keep Shinano in dock and risk her destruction by air attack, or send her to a safer port in Kure for completion. Vice Admiral Kusaka. Ryunosuke gave the order. She would sail. It was a gamble born of necessity. On November 28, 1944, Shinano, only 45% complete, was assigned to escort vessels Isokaze, Yukikaze, and Hamakaze for a secret midnight voyage southward. She carried no aircraft, only 2,400 men, and stores of ammunition and aircraft parts for the defense of Okinawa. Her captain, Toshio Abe, was a proud and capable officer. He had served aboard the battleship Yamato, a ship whose legend had already outgrown its victories. Abe knew Shinano was unfinished. He knew her watertight compartments were untested, her damage control systems incomplete. But orders were orders, and the spirit of the Imperial Navy demanded obedience, even in futility. Before dawn, the harbor at Yokosuka stirred to life. Lines were cast off, and the Shinano began to move. Her massive engines rumbled through the fog, the sound rolling across Tokyo Bay like distant thunder. On the docks, few men watched her go. Fewer still knew what she was. To American intelligence, she was a rumor, a mysterious supercarrier spotted in reconnaissance photos months earlier. To the Japanese Navy, she was their last secret. And to the U.S. submarine fleet, she was about to become the greatest prize of the war. The USS Archerfish. under Commander Joseph F. Enright, had been patrolling off the coast of Japan for days with little success. Her crew, exhausted and tense, scanned the horizon for signs of movement. On the evening of November 28th, sonar picked up a faint echo, large, fast, and heavily escorted. Enright knew he had stumbled onto something unusual. He couldn't see it yet, but the sound told him enough. A target of immense size. He ordered the submarine to shadow the contact through the night, keeping just out of detection range. Hours passed in silence, the kind of silence that only war at sea can create. Above, Shinano steamed southward, unaware that in the black water behind her, an enemy waited with patient precision. Inside the carrier, most of the crew didn't even know where they were going. The ship's orders were secret. The atmosphere was tense but proud. They believed they were serving aboard a weapon that could change Japan's fate. Yet deep within her hull, pumps leaked. Hatches didn't seal. Emergency drills were skipped. The engineering officers, aware of these flaws, could only hope they'd reach Kura without incident. The sea was calm that night. Deceptively calm. But fate, like the ocean, was indifferent. And as the Shinano pushed forward into the darkness, Japan's last hope sailed straight toward its silent destroyer. The Shinano was the largest aircraft carrier ever built during the war. 72,000 tons of ambition. Born from the blueprint of a battleship, she was armored like no other. Her flight deck, nearly 900 feet long, was plated with steel thicker than a destroyer's hull. Beneath it ran 2 hangar decks, massive enough to house dozens of aircraft. She was a fortress designed not just to fight, but to survive. Yet that was her curse. The conversion from battleship to carrier had created a paradox. She carried the weight of a battleship, but the soul of a carrier. Her armor made her slow, her structure heavy, and her ability to launch planes limited. She could never have operated like the fast U.S. Essex-class carriers that dominated the Pacific skies. Japan's engineers had crafted a masterpiece of the past in a war already belonging to the future. In their quest for invincibility, they had built a monument to a dying idea, that steel and pride could still outlast speed and innovation. And beneath her massive hull lay the cruelest irony of all. The very armor designed to save her would trap thousands inside when she sank. Captain Toshio. Abe stood on Shinano's bridge that night, his hand resting on the chart table, eyes fixed on the horizon. He was 51 years old, a career naval officer, disciplined and reserved. To his crew, he was a man of quiet pride, carrying the weight of command with unflinching composure. But within, he wrestled with impossible contradictions. He knew his ship wasn't ready. He knew that many of his crew were green recruits, barely trained, unfamiliar even with basic watertight procedures. He knew the hull beneath him had not been pressure tested, the pumps incomplete. Yet Japan's war had reached a point where doubt itself was treason. In a nation driven by duty, hesitation was seen as weakness, and so Captain Abe obeyed. In the logbook of that night, he wrote a simple line before departure. Proceeding to Kure. All systems report operational. Morale high. He didn't mention the unfinished compartments. He didn't mention that the crew still slept near open hatches, or that the ship's medical bay was unfinished. Instead, he did what every commander of a dying empire did. He placed his faith in the illusion of control. The bridge lights were dimmed for blackout. Outside, only the soft glow of phosphorescent waves marked their path. Around him, young sailors moved in silence. They believed in him. They believed in Shinano. That belief, pure, fragile, and human, would carry them only a few more hours. Far below, the men of the USS Archerfish listened to the heartbeat of the ocean. Commander Joseph F. Enright had waited years for this moment. Earlier in the war, he had been relieved of command after a failed patrol, a humiliation that haunted him. Now, in late 1944, he was determined to redeem himself. When the sonar operator reported a large contact late on November 28th, Enright's instincts sharpened. The readings were unusual. The target was enormous, moving at nearly 20 knots, escorted by destroyers. Whatever it wasn't ordinary. He ordered the submarine to follow, running silent at periscope depth. For hours, the Archerfish tracked its quarry, weaving through the black currents. Each time a destroyer veered close, Enright ordered a dive. The crew held their breath as depth charges rolled into the sea, echoing like thunder underwater. But luck was with them. At 3:30 a.m., the target turned east. Enright realized it was zigzagging. A typical anti-submarine maneuver. He smiled. "They don't know we're here," he whispered. The hunter had become invisible. Above them, Shinano's crew had no idea they were being watched. They believed the darkness was their ally. But beneath that same darkness, a man with steady hands and a score to settle was setting up the perfect shot. The great ship's size had drawn the eyes of heaven, but it also drew the attention of fate. Pride and precision, belief and revenge, all converging beneath the waves. In the distance, dawn was still hours away, and between the hunter below and the hunted above stretched only silence, and 17 hours of destiny. In 1944, Japan's empire stood wounded, yet unbending. The Japanese Navy had once ruled the Pacific with elegance and arrogance, a force that believed in destiny as much as discipline. But after years of defeat, that pride turned inward, transforming into something dangerous. The Shinano was born not from necessity, but from refusal, a refusal to accept that the age of Japan's supremacy was ending. Her construction was an act of defiance, a monument to faith in victory even as the walls closed in. To the admirals in Tokyo, she was proof that Japan could still build greatness. To the men who served aboard her, she was a symbol of hope. Yet that same pride blinded them. Engineers rushed their work, commanders silenced their doubts, and sailors trusted in a myth. No one dared to speak the truth aloud, that launching an unfinished warship into submarine-infested waters was not bravery. It was surrender to illusion. When the Shinano sailed from Yokosuka, she carried not only ammunition and men, but the entire weight of an empire's denial. And in that denial lay her doom. By late 1944, naval warfare had changed forever. No longer did battleships dictate the seas with thunderous guns. Power now lay in the unseen, in the periscope, the torpedo, and the sonar ping echoing through the dark. The United States Navy understood this transformation. Its submarines had become the invisible arm of victory, severing Japan's supply lines and haunting every route between the home islands and the South Pacific. In 1944 alone, American submarines sank over half of Japan's merchant fleet and more than a third of its warships. They were few in number, but devastating in effect. Japan's Navy, however, failed to adapt. Their anti-submarine tactics remained outdated. Escorts were poorly trained, detection equipment unreliable, and communication rigid. Even as their ships vanished one by one, the Imperial Navy clung to traditional notions of honor, preferring bold surface engagements to invisible warfare. That arrogance was fatal. When Shinano left port under escort by 3 destroyers, her commanders believed sheer size and speed would protect her. They underestimated the ocean's new predator, a single submarine capable of destroying a city's worth of steel with one perfect strike. And beneath her hull that night, the revolution of modern warfare waited, quiet, patient, and ready to make history. By the final months of 1944, Japan's industrial heart was breaking. Air raids by American B-29s pounded cities like Nagoya, Osaka, and Tokyo. Shipyards, once alive with sparks and steel, now echoed with silence. Skilled workers were drafted into the army. Factories ran with teenagers and old men. Materials were scarce. Machines lay idle. Every ship Japan built in 1944 was a compromise, assembled with inferior steel, rushed through inspection, held together by necessity more than precision. Shinano was no exception. Her bulkheads were welded in haste. Her compartments were unsealed. Even her watertight doors, vital to survival, had been left partially installed. Engineers warned of risk. Admirals ignored them. In war councils, voices of caution were drowned by desperation. The Empire needed a victory, or at least the illusion of one. And so, Shinano sailed. A masterpiece unfinished. A weapon untested. She represented not Japan's strength, but its exhaustion. Each rivet, each incomplete seam in her hull told the same story. The Empire had built something magnificent, but far too late, and at far too high a cost. The steel that once symbolized power now whispered of fragility, and soon that fragility would meet the relentless precision of an American torpedo. As the great ship plowed southward through the darkness, the world above and below the waves seemed unaware of its historical gravity. One side believed it carried salvation. The other prepared to deliver a final blow that would echo across naval history. The stage was set. Two vessels, one vast and proud, the other small and silent, now converged in the endless black of the Pacific. The next dawn would bring no sunrise for Japan's pride, only the cold flash of torpedoes and the beginning of the end. November 28, 1944. 2200 hours. The waters south of Honshu shimmered faintly under the crescent moon. The sea was calm, deceptively calm. The Shinano steamed ahead at 18 knots, her 3 destroyer escorts forming a loose triangle around her. From above, the formation would have seemed secure, but below, the ocean hid its own geometry, the stalking path of a submarine closing in from the east. Inside Shinano's massive hull, the air was thick and warm. Engines rumbled through the decks, echoing off unfinished bulkheads. Men slept in hammocks strung between girders. Some talked quietly, others prayed. Few of them understood the ship's vulnerability. They saw a floating fortress, its steel armor gleaming under the dim red lights of the lower decks. They did not see the unsealed hatches or the incomplete watertight doors that could turn a single puncture into catastrophe. Captain Toshio Abe stood on the bridge, studying the dark horizon. His officers reported steady speed and calm seas. He nodded, expression unreadable. "Maintain course to Kure," he said quietly. In that same moment, 20 miles away, Commander Joseph F. Enright peered through the periscope of the USS Archerfish. He had been tracking the Japanese convoy since dusk. 6 hours of pursuit, staying just beyond sonar range, timing every maneuver with precision. Now, the contact was moving into position. The silhouette was enormous. Even in the faint moonlight, Enright could see the towering shadow against the sea. A ship unlike anything he'd ever seen. He whispered to his executive officer, "That's no cruiser. That's a carrier. The biggest I've ever laid eyes on." Inside the submarine, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Men whispered, checked gauges, wiped sweat from their faces despite the cold. For them, this was the moment submariners lived for. One perfect shot in the endless ocean. Enright gave his orders in a low, steady voice. Match course. Prepare all tubes. We'll wait for her to turn. He knew the Japanese ship was zigzagging, standard anti-submarine movement, but the pattern was predictable. At 2:45 a.m., the Shinano began a slow starboard turn, heading almost directly across Archerfish's path. Enright's eyes stayed fixed on the periscope. His heart thumped, but his hands were steady. He watched the escorts move ahead, their searchlights scanning the black waves, but none close enough to spot him. Then he saw it, the massive target crossing perfectly in front of his sights. He whispered, "Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. Torpedoes hissed from the Archerfish's bow tubes, streaking silently through the cold Pacific. In the submarine's control room, time seemed to stop. The men listened, counting seconds, breath held. Then, through the steel walls of the sea, came the first dull explosion. Then another, and another, 4 in total, spaced like heartbeats. In an instant, the ocean roared to life. On Shinano's lower decks, sailors were thrown from their hammocks as the ship lurched violently. Bulkheads groaned. Lights flickered. Within seconds, the massive carrier began to list. Water poured through ruptured compartments, spreading faster than anyone could respond. Captain Abe shouted for reports. His officers relayed chaos, flooding on the starboard side, pumps unresponsive, watertight doors jammed. He ordered counter-flooding, but the crew's inexperience turned confusion into panic. Some compartments were sealed too late. Others, left open, allowed water to surge through multiple decks. In the engine rooms, men fought to keep power stable. Sparks flew. Steam hissed. The air was filled with oil and smoke. In the hangars above, men tried to haul hoses and patch holes, but the water was rising too fast. Below, in the submarine, Commander Enright heard the explosions echo back through the deep. He exhaled slowly. "Direct hits," he said. No cheer, no outburst, just the quiet satisfaction of a job done, and the weight of knowing what it meant. He ordered a dive to 400 feet, expecting a counterattack. Depth charges followed, a dozen, then 24, exploding in a furious cascade above. The Archerfish rocked violently, but survived. Hours later, when the crew surfaced, they saw only oil slicks drifting across the moonlit sea. Above, Shinano struggled to stay afloat. Her escorts circled, shining searchlights across her massive hull. Men shouted over the wind, dropping lifelines and rescue nets. Inside the ship, pumps roared but failed to keep pace. The waterline crept higher with each passing hour. Captain Abe refused to abandon ship. He stood firm on the bridge, soaked by seawater spraying through shattered glass, issuing calm orders to the end. But the damage was irreversible. 4 torpedoes, 4, had struck the largest carrier on Earth. And beneath that armor of pride, the sea had found every weakness. As dawn approached, the storm inside the Shinano only worsened. The carrier that symbolized Japan's endurance was now fighting a losing battle. Not against the enemy, but against its own unpreparedness. 100 hours, November 29, 1944. The Pacific was calm again, but only on the surface. Beneath, Shinano fought to live. 4 torpedo holes ripped across her starboard side. Water gushed in with relentless force. Pumps ran continuously, groaning under strain, but they were too few, too weak, and poorly connected between compartments. Every patch the crew attempted failed. The ship's size, her greatest boast, now worked against her. The flooding spread faster than command could control it. Captain Abe remained on the bridge. He had ordered damage control teams below, but communication was breaking down. Compartment after compartment reported flooding. Bulkheads buckled under pressure. Men drowned in darkness before they could seal hatches. By 0400 hours, the list had grown to 15 degrees. The carrier leaned heavily to starboard, the flight deck now glinting unevenly in the faint starlight. Abe gave the order to counter-flood the port side. Engineers obeyed, but without proper training, they overcompensated, worsening the imbalance. The ship's fate tilted further toward the sea. In the engine rooms, the heat was unbearable. Men sloshed through waist-deep water, trying to keep the turbines running. They tore at valves and pumps with bare hands, shouting over the roar of steam. Some refused to leave their stations, clinging to the belief that their endurance could hold the ship together. But Shinano was dying, slowly, mechanically, inevitably. Above decks, sailors clustered near the rails, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The escorts were still nearby, signaling frantically, but even they could not approach too closely. The massive ship's suction could drag them under if she went down. The men whispered prayers. Some sang softly, voices trembling in the wind. Others stared at the sea in silence, knowing they were watching Japan's last hope sink before it ever fought a single battle. At 0700 hours, a brief flicker of sunlight broke through the clouds. It glimmered off the Pacific and touched the wounded ship's hull, a cruel reflection of beauty in ruin. Captain Abe gathered his officers. Reports confirmed what he already knew. Pumps failing, list increasing, power dropping. He refused to abandon ship. "I will not leave her," he told his second-in-command. "The captain must share the fate of his ship." The crew continued to fight, improvising patches from steel plates, using hand pumps, carrying buckets of seawater back overboard. Gestures of courage that changed nothing. By 0900, the list reached 20 degrees. The massive carrier now lay helpless, engines silent, decks awash with seawater. Her escorts came alongside, ready to rescue survivors. But there was no command to abandon yet. Discipline held, even in hopelessness. At 0957 hours, the inevitable began. A deep metallic groan echoed through the hull, the sound of surrender. The Shinano's bow dipped lower, the sea rushing faster into the breached compartments. Men began leaping into the water, some screaming, others eerily calm. Captain Abe remained at his post on the bridge, watching as the sea rose up the windows. He did not speak again. At 10:18 hours, just 17 hours after leaving Yokosuka, the Shinano rolled sharply to starboard, capsized, and slipped beneath the waves. The world's largest aircraft carrier, pride of the Imperial Navy, symbol of a nation's strength, vanished into the depths without ever launching a single aircraft. The sea closed over her like a curtain. The noise faded, and for a long time the ocean was silent once more. Of the 2,400 men aboard, only about 1,080 were rescued by the destroyers. More than 1,400 went down with the ship. Officers, engineers, cooks, clerks, boys barely out of school. Few even knew what they had died for. That night, Commander Enright, aboard the Archerfish, made his log entry. Target believed to be large aircraft carrier. 4 torpedoes observed to hit. Heavy explosions heard. Target sunk. He had no idea he had just destroyed the largest warship ever built. When the U.S. Navy confirmed the kill weeks later, Enright would receive the Navy Cross. The Archerfish became a legend in submarine history. But beneath that victory lay tragedy, the death of a ship that symbolized not strength, but the illusion of it. The Pacific remained calm. Only a thin slick of oil, scattered wreckage, and the rising sun bore witness to what had been lost. Japan's greatest ship was gone, its pride drowned in silence, and with it sank the last echo of Japan's dream of naval supremacy. The ocean had claimed the empire's final monument. Now all that remained were consequences, and the quiet reckoning that would follow in the months ahead. The morning after the Shinano vanished, the sea was still scattered with oil and debris. Sheets of twisted steel floated like dead whales. Wooden planks drifted among life jackets and empty oil drums. Over 1,000 men were gone. The survivors clung to whatever they could find. Debris, ropes, floating crates. The Pacific was merciless. Destroyers Isokaze and Yukikaze swept through the wreckage for hours. They hauled men from the water, many half-conscious, shivering, their faces blackened by oil. Some cried silently, others stared blankly, lips blue with cold and disbelief. They had watched their ship, a vessel larger than any they had imagined, roll over and disappear. For many, it felt like watching Japan itself sink beneath the waves. The destroyer's decks became makeshift hospitals. Medics worked without rest, laying wounded sailors side by side, wrapping them in blankets, whispering prayers under their breath. Captain Abe was not among them. He had gone down with his ship as tradition demanded. Those who survived later said his last order had been simple: save the crew. By noon, the search ended. Only 180 men were recovered alive. More than 1,400 had vanished into the cold Pacific. When word reached Yokosuka, the Navy's reaction was not grief. It was silence. The Shinano's existence had been classified from the beginning. Her loss, therefore, could not be made public. For weeks, even her name was forbidden to be spoken aloud. Families of the dead received vague letters, mentioning only that their loved ones had perished in service to the emperor. No details, no ship, no explanation. Inside Japan's naval command, the truth was devastating. Admirals who had demanded the ship's early departure now faced the consequences of their own desperation. In private meetings, reports were circulated: flooding due to unsealed bulkheads, inexperienced crew, and improper damage control. The findings were damning, but they remained locked away, sealed in military archives. Officially, Shinano had never existed. Unofficially, her loss broke the last remnants of confidence in Japan's Navy. Across the Pacific, U.S. intelligence received fragmented reports from intercepted communications. Analysts struggled to believe what they read: that a new Japanese supercarrier, larger than any ever built, had been sunk on her maiden voyage by a single submarine. The feat seemed almost impossible. When confirmation arrived through prisoner-of-war interrogations months later, the impact rippled through the U.S. Navy. Commander Joseph F. Enright, who had once doubted his own worth as a submariner, now stood among the most successful commanders in naval history. His kill had redefined what a single submarine could achieve. But for Japan, there were no medals, only secrecy, shame, and a quiet understanding that something irreversible had happened. In Tokyo, officers at the Naval General Staff knew what the loss truly meant. The Empire's last hope for a symbolic resurgence had vanished. The industrial resources, the man-hours, the steel, all gone for nothing. And worse, the myth of invincibility that had once surrounded Japan's warships was gone with it. The sea, as always, kept its secrets. No wreckage was ever officially located. No memorial was raised. The Shinano's resting place became one more unmarked grave in the vast Pacific. A silent tomb for men and dreams that had no home left to return to. The Shinano's death was more than a loss of steel and men. It was the loss of an illusion, but her sinking also reshaped strategy, doctrine, and morale on both sides of the Pacific. When Shinano sank, few in Japan understood what had been lost. The Navy did not announce it. Newspapers printed nothing. Even many officers in the Imperial Army, Japan's supposed partners in defense, never learned the truth until after the war. But among the small circle of naval leadership, her loss spread like a quiet infection. They had pinned their last hopes on her completion. She was meant to carry the next generation of carrier aircraft, to guard the homeland from the inevitable American advance. Instead, she joined the long list of vanished dreams. Yamato, Musashi, Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku. The pride of Japan's navy now lay rusting on the seabed, one by one. The psychological impact was profound. Within the Imperial Navy, officers spoke of an invisible curse, not superstition, but the recognition that their command structure had become detached from reality. They had sacrificed truth for appearance and competence for ideology. Every decision now came from fear. Fear of admitting weakness, fear of defying orders, fear of facing the truth that the war was lost. In the months that followed, the collapse accelerated. By early 1945, Japan's fuel reserves were nearly gone. Aircraft could barely reach training altitude. Pilots were sent on one-way missions, the kamikaze, born not from strategy, but from despair. And while men prepared to die for the Emperor, the sea remained dominated by invisible American submarines, each one erasing what remained of Japan's shipping fleet. In Washington, the U.S. Navy studied the Shinano's blueprints and construction details after the war. They marveled at her scale, her armor, her ambition, and quietly noted the fatal flaws that had doomed her. To American naval architects, she was both awe-inspiring and cautionary, a symbol of what happens when design ignores doctrine, when size replaces strategy, and when pride outweighs practicality. For the submarine service, however, her loss became a symbol of precision and patience. The USS Archerfish's engagement with Shinano was taught in naval academies for decades, an example of textbook tracking, positioning, and timing. 4 torpedoes, 17 hours, 1 perfect kill. It was not just victory, it was validation. But beneath the statistics, there was something else. A grim respect. Many American sailors who later learned the truth about Shinano spoke not with triumph, but with awe. They understood the immensity of what they had sunk, and the tragedy of the men who went down with her. The Pacific War was filled with battles measured in blood and tonnage. Yet the Shinano's loss was different. It was a battle between illusion and reality, between the remnants of an empire that still believed it could will victory into existence and the cold precision of a modern war machine that no longer fought for glory, but for efficiency. After the war, divers searched for Shinano's resting place, but the ocean kept her secret. Even today, her exact coordinates remain uncertain. Somewhere off the coast of Honshu, lying in silence beneath 4,000 meters of water. Her steel hull, once polished and proud, is now home to coral and silence. In 1945, when Japan surrendered, the name Shinano was almost forgotten. But among historians and naval men, she would come to represent something larger, not the might of an empire, but the moment it broke beneath its own weight. The empire that built her believed it could conquer time. Instead, Shinano became the measure of how quickly time conquered them. In the vast ledger of war, Shinano is only one name among thousands. Yet her story lingers, not for what she accomplished, but for what she embodied. She was born of faith in invincibility, in the idea that steel, size, and secrecy could preserve a fading empire. But the world of 1944 had changed. Power no longer belonged to the grand or the visible. It belonged to the unseen, to the radar pulse, the submarine wake, the quiet hum of innovation and industry. Shinano was the last monument of an age that believed glory could be built in metal. Her destruction, only 17 hours after she left port, marked more than the loss of a ship. It was the death of a philosophy, the end of the battleship age, and the final echo of Japan's imperial dream. Yet even in her failure, there is something deeply human. The men who built her worked under bombs, in darkness, driven by duty. The men who sailed her believed in a cause greater than themselves, even when the truth whispered otherwise. And the men who sank her did so not in hatred, but in the cold precision of survival. Beneath the strategy, the pride, and the technology, Shinano reminds us that war is not merely the story of nations. It is the story of people caught between belief and inevitability. 17 hours. That is all it took for the largest warship in the world to vanish. But in that brief span of time, the entire arc of modern naval warfare was written. From the age of steel giants to the era of silent hunters. Today, somewhere deep beneath the Pacific, Shinano rests in perfect stillness. Her hull lies buried in darkness, far from the noise of the world that once created her. No flags, no songs, no glory. Only the quiet truth that every empire, no matter how vast, eventually meets the same horizon. And the ocean remembers everything.